Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Stay Healthy Knoxville podcast, brought to you by Simply Physio, aimed at helping you live an enjoyable, fit, and healthy life in and around our community of Knoxville, Tennessee. And now, here is your host, Dr. John Mark Chesney.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. I'm super excited about our guest on the show. So this is the first time that we actually have two guests, so we're going to see how it goes. And hopefully it'll just be a home run. But we got two guests, and they're two guys that I know very well. First one is Daniel Park. Daniel's a lifelong friend, also an expert in the field of emotional health. And he's from Knoxville, married with 4 kids. He's also a real estate agent, has his bachelor's in psychology from Clemson University, and also a master's in organizational leadership from Concordia University, and is also a certified professional coach from Concordia University. So we're going to be talking with both guests, geared more towards Daniel and his expertise on the front half of the show. In the second half, we're going to get into more of Nicaud. So Nicaud is also here in Knoxville. He's originally from New Orleans. Nick was a youth leader when I was in high school, so it goes back also a number of years. A graduate of University of Tennessee here in Knoxville, married with 2 kids. He's been a realtor and continues to be so with Keller Williams for the past 14 years, and also serves on many local nonprofits here in Knoxville. So guys, Nick, Daniel, welcome to Stay Healthy Knoxville.
Thank you. It's fun to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you guys. Look forward to our topic on emotional health, right? This is the first time we've really gotten into this aspect of health. So I'm glad to introduce this to the Knoxville community here, listeners of Stay Healthy Knoxville. So Daniel, would love to start hearing more from your backstory, how you got into the field of emotional health, of psychology, like your interest. Like take us back to like where you really saw that interest and how that's developed, I guess, over your adult life and career.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Joe Mark, we've known each other a long time, and I think we met maybe when we were 3, probably. I was trying to put it back there. But so, when I was in high school, here in Knoxville, we were living life, doing normal things. As we had conversations about what are we going to do when we're older, I remember there was this very vague but very clear message in my head, and that was that I wanted to help people. And I know that teachers help people, doctors help people, firemen help people. That it can apply to lots and lots of fields. But I remember thinking that's just something that I'm very passionate about, and I don't know what context that'll look like. And so when we were roommates at Clemson, and I was studying psychology because it was interesting, I didn't have a great plan. I just thought, I like this class, so maybe I'll make this my major. So, a couple times I thought about going into counseling, but it just never really felt like the right fit for me. And man, it was more than a decade after we finished school at Clemson that I was kind of floundering, honestly. I was in a place where I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I was in my early 30s. We had 3 kids. I'm like, I kind of feel like I should have this figured out, but I don't. And a good friend of mine helped me go out to California and spend some time with Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. And that week out there was extremely helpful and really a defining moment for me, both personally as I grew and basically found myself in group therapy, which was really helpful for me. But I also learned about this field of emotional health and tying that to organizations and individuals and leadership. And so that's what drew me to do the master's program in organizational leadership. And a lot of the program that I did at Concordia is focused on emotional intelligence, emotional health, psychology, and helping people learn how to navigate some of the emotional challenges that we all face in life, regardless of what field we're in, what our family looks like. We all have challenges facing, rejection, failure, motivation, self-awareness. All those things are really important. So anyway, that's kind of a long answer to your question, but that's what led me to really want to get involved in this field and ultimately what I hope to do as a career going forward. So
Sure. And can you describe a little bit more? You said this field, just for our guests, so the field of...
Yeah, so generally I would call it consulting. Some people call it coaching, but it's around organizational psychology. Is the idea. So working with organizations and individuals on their personal development, emotional health, all those sorts of things.
And you mentioned a term, emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's maybe a term that's, out and about more. Maybe, some of our listeners have heard of that term.
Mm-hmm.
Would love for you to really describe what that is, and how can someone know if they have, or what their emotional IQ is, right?
Sure. So that's the idea. Is some people call it EQ because it's similar to your IQ, but it's from a more emotional standpoint. IQ, a lot of research has been done that would suggest that you're really born with your IQ. It's your ability to learn. So it's not necessarily the number of facts you know at any given point, but your ability to learn new information. EQ is really the emotional side of that. And so Daniel Goleman is really the godfather, I don't know what to call him, but he wrote the book called Emotional Intelligence that came out years ago. And he puts it in 5 different categories. First one being self-awareness, which is really important. And it's more than just a personality tool like the Myers-Briggs or the DISC, because, we're only as self-aware as we are already self-aware. So sometimes it helps to have something like what's called an EQ 360, where that's an assessment where you have your friends, family, maybe your spouse, also fill out some personality profiling based on you. So, because we all have blind spots. I did it recently for school, and I personally thought I was great with change. I learned from some coworkers and from my spouse and friends that I'm actually not very good at it. So it's helpful, in terms of self-awareness. So what getting back to what Daniel Goleman says are kind of 5 parts of emotional intelligence are self-awareness, like I said, self-regulation. So once you know what you're feeling, what do you do with that? How do you regulate that in a healthy way or an appropriate way, whether you're in business or working with kids or, whatever it is. Motivation is the 3rd. Empathy is the 4th, which is really my personal favorite. And then people skills would be the 5th, which is a general way of saying you have the ability to really connect with people. Mm-hmm. So
more to read, I guess part of that is reading somebody's nonverbal.
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of nonverbal communication that you can read. And Nick will talk about this later, but in real estate, we get to see that a lot because real estate's such an emotional experience for most people that you can pay attention to their nonverbals and kind of figure out, how you need to respond to really help them in that moment. So,
gotcha. And you said that empathy is one of your, favorites?
Yeah, empathy is my personal favorite. I say that because I think it's a skill. I wouldn't call it just a trait that necessarily people are born with. Some people may be more inclined to be empathetic than others, but it's something you can really learn to do. And first, just to define it, sympathy is feeling bad for somebody. Empathy is connecting with somebody in what they're feeling. So again, this comes up in real estate a lot, but it really can come up in any facet of life. If someone, maybe I'll say it this way. My son Reese, one night was going to bed and he was having a really hard time, And he kept getting out of bed, and I kept putting him back in bed. And he's 4, and that's happens sometimes. But this time I decided to try something a little different. So I started asking him more questions. I was being curious. And he said, well, when I close my eyes, I keep seeing this dragon, so I get scared, so I want to come out. I'm like, oh, buddy, that sounds really scary. So, before I would have thought, well, I'll just need to tell him that's not real. It's just in your head. Go to sleep. But I realized, no, that's not what he needs in this moment. He needs empathy. And so I spent a couple minutes just connecting with him and saying, that does sound really scary. What does this dragon even look like? And he said, it's green and it's big. And I was like, is it doing anything? He said, it's fighting. And I thought, oh my goodness, that sounds so scary. He was like, it is, Dad. And then he goes, okay, I can go to bed now. And I was like, oh, okay. So he just needed a moment, logic, me telling him that's not real. Don't worry about dragons. You'll be fine. Wasn't going to help. He needed someone to empathize and really connect with him. And so he could kind of come down and relax a little bit. And now I tell that story. I'm not always great at that. So I felt like I got a master's to teach me how to, parent my kids when they're having trouble sleeping. So.
Sure. And that's, I guess this may be a generalization, but typically, I guess maybe men are a little bit more logical in thinking. So would that be a counter to like empathizing, like logic are a little bit opposed to each other? Or
yeah, I think so. So from a neurology standpoint, when someone is in what's called fight or flight, or some psychologists add freeze or fold into that, they're in this very emotive state. And so in their brain, they're really operating out of their amygdala. And so using logic really doesn't help them. It's like, it'd almost be like speaking a foreign language. It just doesn't register. And so what is important to do, and this is where empathy comes in, is meeting them in that emotive state and trying to feel with them. That's a great definition of empathy, is just feeling with somebody. And so by doing that, their brain typically will calm down to a place where they can move to their prefrontal cortex, which is more logical, more kind of linear thinking, and then they can make good decisions or not be as rattled or feel that kind of intensity of the fight or flight. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it's the idea of really helping people shift from one part of their brain to the other so that they can calm down, essentially.
Sure.
Which actually brings me to something that I've also learned in parenting that you guys may relate to, is telling a kid to calm down when they're not calm is really not effective at all. I don't know if you can relate to that, but
actually yelling it at them, right?
Yes, exactly. Yelling, calm down. Exactly. Yeah.
So, well, I'm sure that I think the topic of empathy is like a really interesting one, and while we're discussing it, like maybe I know you give an example for your child, and maybe it's not that much different for an adult, but where that can relate to maybe a situation for an adult where having the ability to tap into the empathetic side versus the logical side can really be a game changer. From your experience, I don't know, does a certain example come to mind?
Yeah, actually. So I finished my master's program last May, and prior to that, one of my classmates who lives in Dallas, he called me one day and said, "Hey, I just got assigned this project, and I'm kind of freaking out. I'm not good at this. I don't really know what to do. I don't even know how to get started, and I just need to know, can you relate to that?" And I thought there for a second, and my first instinct was to tell him, maybe there's a guy down your hall that can help you out. He's maybe better at this, and so why don't you just go ask for some help? But in that moment of pause, I thought, no, he just asked me if I can relate. He didn't ask for a suggestion. And so I sat for a moment and said, you know what? I can relate to that. And it reminds me of this time when I got assigned this project, when I had this other job. And man, I just felt stuck because it was out of my wheelhouse. I really didn't know how to begin. So I certainly can relate to what you're feeling right now. And he goes, wow, I feel better. I was like, great. Okay. And I thought, oh, that's kind of weird. So we hung up the phone. It was not a long conversation. He texted me about 30 minutes later and said, hey, great news. I went down the hall and I asked this guy to help me with this project. And he said, yeah, I'd love to. And we're going to knock it out this afternoon. And I thought, that's so odd that he didn't need an answer. He didn't need a suggestion. He just needed someone to connect, because what he was able to do then from a neuroscience standpoint was move from his brain to where he could think more logically. So I think most people can figure out kind of their own problems or their own issues if they have someone meet them in that emotional state and connect with them. And relating is a great way to do it. Now, I will give a quick caveat that I've mentioned before, that in that relating instance, it's good to not make that a 10-minute conversation about yourself. It's good to keep it short because, maybe a minute or even 30 seconds of connecting, saying, yeah, I relate to that. But if you start to drag on and on, suddenly the conversation becomes about you and your story instead of theirs.
Sure. With dealing with, stress, a lot of times, like the example that you gave, this friend called you because he was in a state of some level of stress, right? Yeah. And the stress was, blocking him from really seeing things clearly, and being able to tap into like, hey, what you're just relating to him, let him know that that it's normal to be, feeling this. He's not the only one. Like, it gives somebody some level of like clarity. Why is it important for you personally to learn, for our listeners to learn how to navigate stress?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thinking back to that example, most people would not have reached out to somebody in that situation that my friend was in. They would have just, I don't know, tried to figure it out, tried to do their best. But the reason I think it's really important in those stressful moments to connect with somebody, and that somebody needs to be a safe person, because again, the goal here is connection. It's not a solution necessarily. And if you don't do that, I believe, and I think there's plenty of research to support it, that unaddressed stress really can lead to some dark things like addiction. It can lead to family issues, parenting challenges if we don't address stress in a healthy way. And I think, that's one example, is reaching out to somebody who's a safe person for some empathy is a healthy way. There's other healthy ways, like taking a few minutes to breathe. I know that sounds a little silly, but Joe Mark, I know as a doctor, you probably can understand that when people are really in a stressful moment, their breath shortens.
Changes.
Yeah, and which heightens their blood pressure, which just kind of escalates what they're feeling anyway. I had a stressful situation a couple months ago and reached out to a friend, and I feel like I know the answers, but he still had to remind me, hey, you need to breathe. Slow down a second. And it really helps. I think also sometimes people aren't available when you're reaching out. And so taking a couple of minutes to journal, write down what you're experiencing, what you're feeling in that moment can help you address that stress in a healthy way, so that it doesn't escalate and get to, some really unhealthy places.
Sure. Yeah. And, the breathing strategy, this one that I find, with a client who is just generally, like if somebody has just stress, usually you'll find that in their muscles. Like,
I believe it.
Tense spots and trigger points. And then if it's there, then they're not moving well. And that can be a large point of why they're coming in for treatment in the clinic. And so yeah, breathing is one that's really helps, but it's tapping into a lot of it is just, just letting things kind of just go. and breathing in a way that helps to kind of release some of that muscular tone.
Right. And yeah, I think it's really important to turn to, methods like that rather than some really unhealthy practices that people tend to cope with. So yeah, that's a good question.
Sure. And then kind of back to the emotional intelligence, how do you see ways that emotional intelligence benefits people maybe in any industry or phases of life? And was actually the emotional intelligence, with that question, I believe it was in a recent sermon it came up in our church. And you maybe can validate this if this is correct, but I believe the statement was that the predictors of success in somebody like in the workplace is mostly if they're trying to find some predictor, the highest predictor is somebody's emotional IQ or however you stated their emotional intelligence.
Right.
Is a very strong predictor for actually them being successful like in the workplace.
Yeah. I mean, it not only benefits people's just kind of place in life and development and growth, but also, like you said, their ability in the workplace. So there's been some different studies. Google did one. Google did something called Project Aristotle, where they researched their own employees over the course of a decade, I believe, to see who are the highest performers in our company and what are their characteristics. And, Google is a technology company, so you would think that it's science, technology, engineering, mathematics. It's the people that score highest in those categories. But after that research, they realized, oh, wow, no, it's not. It's actually the people that scored highest in what's called emotional intelligence. So the idea that people can empathize, can connect on an emotional level, have high self-awareness, all those things that we were talking about earlier, those were the highest performers. And there's been a couple other studies where I think it was the Carnegie Institute of Technology did one where they determined that 85% of an individual's financial success in the workplace is due to their skills in what they called human engineering, but again, around the idea of emotional intelligence or these soft skills that we're talking about, the connecting with people.
So if one of our listeners is really interested in tapping into like really what is my emotional intelligence, any resources or kind of starting points for somebody just to, I would just assume the first step is like where am I at this? Like how am I?
Sure.
Where do I fall? Like what score do I get? Right.
Yeah. I mean, I'm joking, but you could ask your friends because they'll hopefully be pretty honest with you if you score high on or your spouse if you have one. But I think self-awareness is really so foundational to this that's where I would suggest people to start. So by moving into that, it's researching tools like the Myers-Briggs personality profiling system or the DISC. The Enneagram is a great one because you kind of have to work at that one. And then ask for some feedback. I think that's just really an important tool. I know I was kind of joking earlier about getting your friends to weigh in, but ask people, how do I come across to you? Am I warm or, can you relate to me? Getting the input of those who know you best is really important. So I think that's probably where I would suggest. And then there's plenty of books. Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman is a great one. He also, I think, co-authored one called Primal Leadership, which is another great one to check out. And then, I mentioned before Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. They've got some incredible books. One specific that jumps out to me that's not as popular from them, but it's called How People Grow, and it's a great one to get into this a little more. So
you mentioned one of the easiest things is just to ask. Ask the people that are close to you, right? You said if you have a spouse, if you have, or just your friends, hopefully you have some friends.
Yeah.
Your friends to ask.
Some close friends, yeah.
People that you relate with, coworkers.
Yeah.
Could be one too.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention that it's good to be in a teachable mindset, because you can really go in and get your feelings hurt pretty quickly doing that. But if you're in a space where you really want to grow and you really want to have a better grasp of your own kind of skill set, self-awareness, all those things we've been talking about, coming from a place of humility where you want some input, I think that's a great place to go.
Sure. And then so let's say somebody gets some feedback that's maybe a little bit on the colder side. They're just like, hey, this is an area that you could probably work on.
Yeah.
What maybe some practical steps of, like, if somebody does go to that step of, asking some people, what would be the next step as far as, like, hey, this is something I really want to work on, improving myself, improving my emotional intelligence, improving my empathy, self-awareness. How would somebody go about kind of taking that next step?
Yeah. So, most people don't love to hear negative or critical feedback. I think that's a pretty common trait among humans. I would say, a great next step when you have that is processing that with a safe person, kind of like what we've been talking about here. But reach out to somebody else and say, hey, I just got this feedback. I'm not asking you to tell me if you agree or disagree. I just need to tell you how it made me feel. And spend a couple minutes talking about, man, it really hurt. And I think it's true, whatever that it is they shared, or however you want to process it. I don't need to put words in people's mouths, but I think it's good to process that with a safe person. Again, I think there's some real strength in journaling. Sometimes that safe person's not available.
Sure. And
so taking a few minutes, I'd even suggest doing it by hand, not just on your phone or your computer, because I think that slows you down a little bit to write it out by hand. But just saying, I just received this feedback. This is kind of how I'm experiencing it. And that'll help you kind of slow down to then look at it more objectively from a logical standpoint. Like, oh man, maybe I do have a short temper with my coworkers. What are some things I can do to work on this? And get some help. Coaches are great. Counselors are great. I'm big on people going to therapy. I think it's really helpful, and that may be a good outlet for people to process this.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's, like you said, that if somebody's really going the next step, when it's like showing, like, one, if you're even asking somebody, like, you're probably ahead of the curve by most people, being kind of setting yourself up in a way that you could receive, a few strikes against you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It goes, shows a lot about your character and what you're striving to do. So can be encouraged if you're even that vulnerable to ask, that step. But yeah, I think, like you said, of having, some people that you can work through that with, some people have to work through it by themselves to some degree, but I know I tend to be one that I need to, process some internally, but I think my fault is, if I stay there, then I never gain the opportunity to have somebody else speak in, into that even further.
Yeah. That's good.
Well, yeah, I want to kind of transition here. We're going to have a break here in just a second to hear a word from our sponsor. So you guys hang with us. We're going to, still along the same topic of emotional health and transitions and stress, we're going to lead into an example that I'm sure everybody has experienced, or if you haven't yet, you will at some point, as far as a big life changer of moving, buying or selling a house, and really giving some practical examples of how we can navigate the emotional stress of that so that people can come out on the other side and just in a healthy state. So stay with us, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Stay Healthy Knoxville is sponsored by Simply Physio, a physio clinic that equips and empowers you to live your life to the fullest so that you can enjoy the things you love to do and be the person you are made to be. Simply Physio specializes in helping people get back to a healthy and active lifestyle, living free from pain and medication and avoiding unnecessary surgery. Stay tuned until the end of the episode to receive a special gift from Simply Physio and enjoy listening to the rest of the episode.
Welcome back to the show. So we're just a slight transition here, still the same topic, but want to just nail down some more specific applications of the topic of stress, emotional health, but in the terms of buying or selling a house. So Nick here, I'm glad to have you join us. So Nick is an expert in helping people navigate the stress of buying or selling a house, and would love, Nick, for you just to share with our listeners a little bit of how you got into the field of helping people in that way through real estate.
Absolutely. So I started about 14 years ago and just got in and recently married, and business started to pick up. I've always had a fascination in real estate. In many ways, my family, I grew up in it through rental property, investment properties. A few family members have sold real estate. So I've always had this fascination with just that every day looked different, and we got to come alongside people and help them experience something that doesn't happen every day, right? And so in a way, not necessarily hold hands, but to come alongside people. So that experience fascinated me, experiencing my parents buying a few houses and some friends over the years. And so jumped into that and really didn't know what I was doing to many degrees. But over the years, you start to gain experience and have certain things that kind of steer you in one direction or the other. Like Daniel was saying earlier, you just have these crises in life that you're just like, I don't really know what I'm going to do. In real estate, you just begin to find a niche. And part of that niche for me is just, again, coming alongside people. And so that's sort of how I jumped into it.
Sure. Was there a time, maybe as, on this journey, you said you've been, working really in the area of real estate for 14 years. Was there a time when, I don't know if there was a turning point or kind of a transition, or if it was kind of a slow kind of realization of like, hey, I'm not just helping somebody buy a house. It's actually more than that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, you mentioned earlier, I was a youth pastor for many years, and I just, as I got into the business world, my heart never changed. My heart was always for people and to kind of help them walk through life. And so I maybe in the back of my head or subconsciously have always had that approach in life, but it began to lay itself out over the years of, the ways that me coming alongside people in that life experience or that life situation that I could come along and how that played out over time. So there's not one unique way. I would say a lot of it is just in my heart. It's just germinated all these years, and it has played itself out through real estate. So
sure. And I know a little bit of the backstory. I'd love for you to tell our listeners of how, I know you've known Daniel for a long time, but how that really, you guys got connected in the terms of like with Keller Williams and joining your team, and
sure,
why you kind of saw that as a need in that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. So Daniel and I have known each other, same with you, John Mark, just years ago, just in youth ministry. And Daniel was probably, I don't even know, 13, something like
middle school sometime.
Yeah, there's so many stories. And we reconnected years later just through a men's group and just hanging out. And he's telling me the things that he's stepping into and his dreams of what he wants to do, and I'm telling him where I'm at. And at that same season of life, I was kind of starting to sense internally some friction and some stress in my life as my business began to grow in real estate. We had onboarded a few agents to help with overflow and client care, if you will, and it wasn't an easy transition because now I'm not just coming alongside clients, I'm coming alongside agents.
Sure.
Hearing Daniel talk about this emotional health and stuff like that, it started to germinate in my heart like, wow, this is amazing. So I took interest in it, and somehow over a few months, maybe a year even, I don't know, Daniel has a past and still is active in real estate, and an opportunity opened up for Daniel to kind of come on board with our team. And I think it's twofold. One is to help with my stress selfishly on my end. And two, we had agents that were on our team that were more a millennial mindset. That was hard for me to, I just was able to have a soundboard in Daniel, and not just any soundboard. I mean, somebody who's currently getting a master's degree, currently delving into it in a very, very deep way. So it was amazing. So.
Yeah.
So you're working with millennials, huh? So I think I'm actually, and Daniel, I guess you're the same. Like, I don't know where I'm like, we're right on that line, right?
We are very close. I've had some people tell me that we are in the millennial category, being 1982, and then others that are like, no, you missed it. You're a little older than the millennials. So I don't know.
So we can go either way, I guess, right?
Yeah, we get to pick.
Identify with.
Well, at the core, it's the soul, right? Or it's like,
Yeah,
we all both have old souls.
That's true.
In a lot of good ways.
So yeah, I mean, that's I guess a topic we haven't really talked much about, like having some other friends in real estate, just in that field. That's just what a high stakes or a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
With a sell versus not, and just the inconsistency of it all.
Yes, absolutely. And there's other things that play in, like most people don't talk about their finances. When you go to buy a house, things come out of people that they're not used to dealing with. And, in a lot of ways, Daniel and I talk about this, is, we are not just realtors. In a lot of ways, we're sort of unprofessionalized psychologists,
Sure.
And so we begin to experience that. Well, in the same sense as agents as well, those things come out, And so Daniel's just, again, the things that he shared early part of the series here, or the show, is it's not just for, it's any profession. It's across the board. And so, again, going back to these young agents just getting in, they're experiencing things. And then when money's tied to it, relationships are tied to it. And we get to become a huge part of that. And a lot of that is being like Daniel's friend, just, hey, man, let's just take a deep breath. They're experiencing things that they don't experience every day, and things begin to bubble out of people unexpectedly. And we have a great opportunity to speak into that and to kind of come alongside them. And again, people don't buy houses but every 7 or 8 years. So it doesn't come up that often.
Sure. Well, you mentioned how there was kind of a piece of this that you were, struggling with, personally, as far as, dealing with some of the stress of a growing business, of added employees that you're also somewhat responsible for, but you also have, clients that you're responsible for, and just interested in somebody who's kind of recognized that, and then been working, with Daniel, or who's working to develop that skill set of helping people navigate that. What that's been like for you, if you even have any practical tips of things that you've learned along the way, and how to handle some of that stress.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel hit on a few of them, just taking a deep breath. And I could give you story after story that I've come to Daniel with things. And probably his best advice that he's given me is just to, again, take a deep breath. And he's kind of helped me to understand, and I feel like I've put into practice over the last couple of years, of just, time. If you don't respond immediately and give time, it allows, and I don't know the professional terminology, but when you're emotionally reacting, if you give it time and space, and you get back to that, to your rational thought, for me, that's been the most powerful advice, and I think has saved a lot of transactions, if we get into the business terminology. But in the relational, it keeps me in a good standing with my client, as well as, say, a buyer or a seller on the other end.
Sure.
So I guess just the deep breath, take a step back, and those are the biggest things. And not always saying it could be worse, but understanding that everybody in the transaction itself is doing the best that they can. And not necessarily giving the benefit of the doubt, but giving space for things to play out a little bit.
Sure.
I feel like it's the approach that our team takes is, let's not jump to conclusions. Let's take a couple steps back, and let's let this play out a little bit. At the same time, we're not holding things back. We're explaining, hey, this is where we're at. This is where we're going the whole time. So we're not holding back information, but we're also not bringing up something that may have nothing to do with the actual transaction. So.
Sure. I think that's a great tip, Nick. Like, as far as like an emotionally charged maybe situation, whether it be buying or selling a house or any other situation of like taking a step back and letting kind of the fire kind of just settle a little bit before kind of making a decision. Would think about even, I don't know how you guys give advice like in real estate and with some of like the season here recently when maybe time, like what would you advise a client when like things are like, the market's fast or, it may not just be a house, it could be something else where any other situation where times like you can't just like wait on it for weeks, right?
Absolutely.
How do you handle that? How do you advise, clients maybe, in real estate or other clients in that type of situation where there's a little bit of, let's not jump to a decision under an emotionally charged situation, but we need to make a decision too.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. I think part of it is setting appropriate expectations. And again, that applies for Nick and I specifically in real estate in that setting that you're talking about, John Mark, but it can apply in any facet, industry, or even with your family. Setting appropriate expectations is really important. So for what you just described, it's letting your client know, hey, when we find the house, there's not going to be time for a second showing. We're going to need to make an offer. So just preparing them for that. And then I think it's just kind of what we've been talking about, taking a couple of minutes to acknowledge that's tough. It's stressful. This, a lot of times for people, is some of the biggest transactions they're going to experience in their lifetime. Mm-hmm. And we're telling them to make that decision during a 20-minute walkthrough of a house. Sometimes it's even sight unseen. That doesn't happen as often, but it does happen sometimes. And so taking a moment to say, this is stressful, and that's okay. But it is stressful, and it's okay to feel that way or feel what you're feeling. I don't know if you want to add into that.
Well, I think a lot of it is just there is strategy around approaching a multiple offer situation. But the biggest thing, you kind of nailed it, in my opinion, is just laying out an approach. And I tend to tell people, there's a bunch of houses on the market. A lot of it is the way we approach it. And the season, when you walk into a house, you'll have a feeling. Is that 100% accurate? Sometimes we'll have people where they don't approach it as a home, as a traditional home. Some people look at every home as an investment transaction, right? Mm-hmm. So that goes back to strategy and things like that. So each person's different, but overall, I think just communicating effectively before going through homes, of saying, us as agents understanding a little more in depth of their the way that they approach the world or the way they approach their family and the security of that, and then putting a plan around it. And like you said, Daniel, earlier, of just, hey, we're not going to be able to go through this house again. So when we're going through it, let's see if we can put you here. And then we've had a lot of multiple offer situations this year, and it's been a wild ride this year.
Yeah, that's true.
When somebody maybe has received some frustrating news, whether about like, hey, we got 3 other offers on this house, or maybe they've had a home inspection or appraisal that comes back different than expected. What are common, like, how do you handle that situation? What do you advise? How do you communicate to somebody who's now this emotional like ups and downs, right, of trying to find a house and just the roller coaster ride through that?
Well, not to keep going back to Daniel, but I mean, empathy is massive in this part, and just to hear them. And a lot of times it's not about the house being lost. It's just that feeling of loss, right? It's not, I mean, selling houses for so many years, we understand that you can have a house and it meet all of your criteria. But you'll find that again. But a lot of times the emotional, if you've already put yourself in that home, that's the issue. It's not the loss of the home. It's the loss of the feeling like you are home. If that makes sense. And I think a lot of, back to what we've been talking about, taking that step back, telling your client, and this has been this tough, it's tough to not won this one and not necessarily jump back in like the next one we're going to approach it this way, but let them, and as well as us agents, sit in that. So I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's giving some space to let them really feel what they're experiencing after they get that inspection report. And, as best we can, relating and empathizing in that moment will help them calm down. That doesn't mean that they then say, great, actually the house is perfect. It just means that they can look at it from a more objective place rather than subjective based on how they're feeling when they get that information.
And we've had, I remember one client this year, they put their home search on hold for 6 months because the emotional toll it took. But being honest, allowing them to sit in it, they recognized they just weren't ready. And so we, as a team, kind of came around them, or, myself and the agent that was working with them, and just said, hey, we just want to come alongside you. And when that time's right, let us know. And we'd stay in touch with them. And recently they just bought a house. I mean, it's been 6 months, but that was their process, right? That was their walk in life. And being able to come alongside them, not say, hey, we'll get this next one, and push them, not just keep pushing.
Sure.
And
sounds like they have some awareness.
A lot. Yeah,
Right.
That's great.
They must have had some emotional intelligence there
They
to
certainly did.
identify what their needs to.
Yeah.
It's better to take a step back than to kind of keep going when the candle's kind of burning pretty low. Well, I don't know if there's any other tips for that you would even kind of leave our listeners with when it kind of comes down to like making a decision on something big like that. We're talking the example of, buying a house, and, there's a lot that goes into that, just those kind of those big decisions, and a decision, needs to be made. And any other kind of tips that you find really help your clients to come to just a healthy decision?
Well, for me, I would say, and this is sort of a reoccurring comment that I make to most clients, is let's not jump to conclusions, as I mentioned earlier, because I think that we live in a culture that is accusatory. And so when anything does not go your way, especially buying a house, when it's emotional, relational, it's just exhausting in many ways. If you're not working with the right agent, or if the process has been lengthy, it just starts to wear on you. And what begins to happen, and because we're naturally human, is we accuse others, right? And so I'm trying to continually say, hey, I know this is not going our way right now, but it's not necessarily this person's fault or this person's fault. And I don't do it in a way that is not allowing blame to be in a certain way, but I just think we respond always as humans in a reactionary way, and it tends to be negative. And so just trying to get them back on board in a positive light, that is usually my focus. And so I would just encourage anybody going through the home buying or selling process, it's not always smooth, but you can control the way that you are walking through that process. You can control your emotions. And a lot of times, to be honest with you, that dictates the outcome of the process, And again, that's not 100% foolproof. There's nothing foolproof. Sure. But we can control our emotions, and that's the biggest thing. And being educated, those are probably the two biggest things for me.
I want to really transition to the rest of our podcast questions to finish up. But before we do, Nicaud, I'd love to I had a question for you. Sure. I was wondering the last time you watched an Adam Sandler movie. I remember probably going through the Adam Sandler trilogies of Happy Gilmore back in high school in your living room.
Oh,
when was the last time you watched that Adam Sandler movie?
It's sad but true. It's probably been not too long, a month. So
is he still producing movies?
I love it.
We had a guys' night not too long ago, and we broke out a Adam Sandler and Will Ferrell movie.
Okay,
and
that's
so
awesome.
Ironic that you asked that question.
Awesome. I must have been. Junior, senior year.
Oh,
in your basement there at the house and watching Happy Gilmore and what were the other ones?
Well, there's Billy Madison.
Billy Madison. Not to
Madison.
get too far off topic. So I think
Humor's never
completely,
wrong.
Derailed. So if you hadn't, so maybe that's a healthy. Let's tie this back in. So sometimes you need a good laugh, right?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
true.
And if you're going through a stressful situation, get yourself an Adam Sandler movie, right?
There you go.
Can't go wrong.
All right.
Can't go wrong.
All right, guys. Well, like to talk about Knoxville. This is a Knoxville podcast. It's for the Knoxville community and encourages people to explore. So I'd love to hear from you guys. What's something Knoxville, greater kind of East Tennessee area, something on your bucket list that you'd like to do?
Well, I'll jump in here. I actually got to do it about a week ago. So I was born and raised here in Knoxville, and most Knoxvillians know that in 1982 the World's Fair was here, which is why we have the Sun Sphere downtown. I'd never been in it. I'm 36 and had admired it from a distance my whole life. So about a week ago, I got to walk through it with a friend there, and it was pretty amazing. The views are incredible. So that was really fun, especially when I got to tell my kids, hey, you know what? I got to go in the Sun Sphere. And they're like, no way.
That's
So
awesome.
they may end up getting there before they're 36. We'll see.
Do they have a tours? Can you just get up there?
We can line that up.
I don't know if there's official tour. That's a good question. But yeah, we could help with that.
All right. You guys might be getting some phone calls here.
That's awesome.
Nick, what about you?
Well, for me, mine would probably be, I've never run a half marathon, let alone a full marathon, but I'd like to run in the Covenant. Is the Covenant Marathon the one that runs into the football stadium?
Yes.
It used to. They actually just changed it. So now it ends at World's Fair Park.
Wasn't that just a temporary change?
Oh, was it? Maybe.
I thought it was, I might be wrong. But
Maybe they're going back to Neyland
I thought
Stadium.
it was something
Maybe
with,
it's to run up the Sun Sphere.
Yeah, all those stairs.
I thought it was something
Maybe
with
it was just
construction or
temporary.
something, but
Okay.
people check on that.
Yeah.
Well, mine would be to run. I would like to run my first half or full marathon here in Knoxville.
Awesome.
But I will say I spent a night at LeConte, which I've always wanted to do, and so I stayed over one night recently with some buddies, and it was a great experience. And it was the last time that you actually could have a I don't know what they call them, scholarship, where you can go every year at the same date. Like now it's a raffle, so it's kind of cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
But man, if you've never hiked that or been up there,
I've never stayed in the lodge. I've been up there.
yeah, that was for me. I got to stay this time, and it was amazing. So
One of the first times was a cross country training that I'm sure
I was
you were
just
on with
thinking
your
about
dad,
that. Yeah.
running up to LeConte in 8th grade, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember this part, but we were throwing rocks off the top and people started yelling from below because we were hitting them on accident. We didn't see them in the trees.
I do remember that.
that's hilarious.
All right, guys. With love to hear what's one of your guys' favorite things to do around Knoxville.
That's a great question. I love to just go downtown around Market Square and walk. And with the kids, sometimes they play in that fountain there at Market Square and get soaked, and even in their normal clothes. But just being down there, whether it's during one of the festivals or really any time, is really fun for our family.
Yeah, I would second that to a good degree. And my family with 2 little kids, we go to the farmers market typically almost every Saturday morning. And
Market
that's
Square.
the Market Square farmers market. Yeah, and we just walk around. They got the fountains, and that's our little cheers, if you will.
Nice. Do you guys know if that runs the farmers market? How far through it goes through Christmas, right?
I think so.
At least Christmas.
Yeah.
This will
I'm not
be
sure.
coming out in November.
Right.
So you guys check. I'm sure if you want to do that, it's something to definitely hit up.
Well, it's definitely during the ice skating, right?
True, because
That's right.
they have
So
the
at least
rink up there.
goes through the winter or through the Christmas time. So let's hear about a favorite restaurant.
Oh man, mine is Adopo. Their pizza is unreal. Love it. My wife and I both love going there.
Where is Adobo?
It's just north of downtown. So if you can just go where Regas Square is, or the old Regas restaurant, it's just about a block north of there.
So mine would be probably Amelia. We really like that. And, it's in Market Square, so we visit that a lot. So
Nice.
I mean, but I love Adopo. I just don't want to keep saying the same things as Daniel. But we do. My wife and I, that is sort of a date spot that we like to go to. Amelia is just really good. So, and Keffy's
Now I was
rivaling that.
I was
yeah.
there last week. I don't really
Really?
get out much. Don't get downtown much, but went out for my birthday with my parents.
That's
and
awesome.
I went to Kefi, and it was amazing. So
Awesome.
Good to hear.
another place there at the Old City
Mm-hmm.
to look into. Kind of wrapping up, what would you guys have for our listeners on one of your best tips, recommendations for staying healthy?
I'll jump in here. I think, what we've been talking about today is really important in staying healthy from an emotional standpoint, and that's finding some safe friends. There's a lot of research out there. I won't get into it right now, but loneliness is a pretty dangerous place for people, and unfortunately, it's pretty common in culture today. So having a few safe people that you can be yourself with, be honest with, be vulnerable, but also just have fun too is really important and really good for people's health, in my opinion.
Great, Nick.
Well, one of the things my wife has me eating no meat Mondays, so
Nice.
eating less meat, red meat that is.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
On Mondays.
I'll stretch it sometimes, So I'm personally just trying to,
Cut back some.
cut back on some red meat.
Gotcha.
So,
All right. Well, if our listeners have a need, potentially buying or selling a house, Nick, why don't you go first? How can people get in contact with you?
absolutely. The best way is probably our website, which is thenicaud.com. And if you don't know how to spell my last name, it'll be in the show notes, but it's Nicaud. D is in David.
And Nick with no K.
Nick with no K, thenicaudteam.com. Yes.
All right.
Good.
And then Daniel, tell us who you work with, and then who may be interested in also contacting you and what you do.
Yeah, great question. So, on one hand, I still do sales real estate too, but also really getting into what most people call coaching or consulting, and that's both with individual leaders. So some clients are just leaders in their community or in their organization, and it's a lot of one-on-one work. I will give the caveat, I'm not a licensed therapist, and so I think those people are amazing, but that's not what I do. This is a little more looking forward, less looking back. So if that makes sense for people, how do we get to where they want to be personally, professionally, in their family life, in their social life? And then also from an organizational standpoint, so working with companies to help them establish really healthy practices in their culture to build up trust within their organization. The goal there is that their employees, the happier and healthier they are, the more productive they are, and the less turnover that the organization experiences. So those are really two groups, leaders and organizations love to work with. So we are launching a company called Sequoia Leadership Collective, and the website is leadershipcollective.net.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yep. Great, guys. Well, it's been a blast having you guys on the show.
Yeah, this is fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This is great. Love the memories and where we're at.
Yep.
Definitely. Well, thank you for our listeners for hanging on here to the end. Stay healthy, Knoxville.
Thank you for tuning in to the Stay Healthy Knoxville podcast, brought to you by Simply Physio. If your pain is preventing you from staying healthy and active, and you'd like to avoid surgery, pain medicine, or just want to get back to doing the things you love in and around Knoxville, we offer both a free ebook and free over-the-phone consultation to help you figure out the root cause of your pain and the next best steps for resolving it. Find our ebooks online at simplypt.com/health-tips. There you will find ebooks for topics such as neck and shoulder pain, lower back and hip pain, knee pain, and TMJ. These quick-to-read reports will provide you with expert tips, tricks, and exercises to help solve your pain from the comfort of your own home. Just visit simplypt.com/health-tips to download your ebook and have it delivered directly to your inbox. We also offer free, no-obligation phone consultations with a doctor of physical therapy to Knoxville area residents. Just call us at 865-351-0000 0615 or visit us at simplypt.com and click the Talk to a PT button on the home page to schedule a call with us. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next time on the Stay Healthy Knoxville podcast.